we might as well, let's talk about Crevecoeur first. Crevecoeur first, and then we'll go to Franklin and then we'll end with Jefferson. Crevecoeur's letter is, this is one of the most important documents in American literature because it's almost like the city on the hill from last week as far as like its importance in defining like who we are as Americans. So it's about page 630. It's in the 630s. It's when the Crevecoeur letter starts. So these letters from an American farmer, that was the name of this book that came out. This was published over in England, and it became a big hit over there. And even though Crevecoeur lived through the American Revolution, he really wasn't this big government official like Franklin and Jefferson were. But this is a very foundational text. There's lots of interest, and this is written in letters. So he's taking on almost like a persona in each letter. So letter 3 is the famous one, what is an American? So he's taking this persona of a Pennsylvania farmer, in the 18th century, right? He's taking on this persona of a farmer. And this was a time period in America where there was this divide that started coming up. Right? Should we could segue to talk a little Jefferson during this conversation. Should we be farmers? Should we be a nation of farmers? Or should we be a nation of manufacturing, of factories and textile mills and things like that? That actually even kind of formed almost the first political parties that would emerge in the early American nation. You guys might know that Jefferson founded what was called the Republican Party at the time. Nothing similar to what Republicans are today. There's some ideas that kind of translate over. The Republicans were all about small federal governments, but they believed that small farming is the way to go. Right? We'll be a great nation if pretty much everybody owns a farm, everybody owns a piece of land, everybody can sustain themselves. That type of country will be a country where the divide between rich and poor isn't too much. It's roughly equal. Crevecoeur actually talks about that in this letter, talking about how in this time period, there wasn't a whole lot of difference between rich and poor. Right? Almost everybody who owned a little bit of land, you could make a good living. So of all time periods where this idea of the American dream, right? If you work hard, you can succeed. This was probably the time period where that was most able to happen, right? Where there was so much land available, you could just take some and live your life. If you started out in a rough spot in life, kind of like Franklin, you could work as an indentured servant for like 10 years and then get enough money to buy a piece of land. So, so that's the early Republican vision of America. It's local government is better than federal government. Right? Keep it local. Let's have farms. If everybody has farms, everybody has basic dignity, right? Let's look at Jefferson really quick. Just this one part of Jefferson, and that's on page 720. 720. This is related to Crevecoeur. The Jefferson section here is very relevant. So if you look at the second paragraph in 720, Jefferson says the political economists of Europe have established it as a principle that every state should endeavor to manufacture for itself. And this principle, like many others, we transfer to America without calculating the difference of circumstance, which should often produce a difference of result. In Europe, the lands are either cultivated or locked up against the cultivator. Manufacture must therefore be resorted to of necessity, not of choice, to support the surplus of their people. We have an immensity of land courting the industry of the husbandman. Is it best then that all our citizens should be employed in its improvement, or that one half should be called off from that to exercise manufactures and handicraft arts for the other? Those who labor in the earth are the chosen people of God, if ever he had a chosen people, whose breasts he had made his peculiar deposit for substantial and genuine virtue. So that's a famous quote, about he who labors in the earth is the chosen people of God. Right? That's the Jeffersonian vision of America that sprang up. The manufacturing version of America, you guys probably know, created the early Federalist Party. So that party was created pretty much by Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton was George Washington's Secretary of the Treasury. Thomas Jefferson was George Washington's Secretary of State. These two guys pretty much battled it out because they had these they butted heads. They had these two different competing visions of America. Which version won out? Hamilton's. Right? Today, we're mostly a country of manufacturing. You don't see too many small farmers today. Even the farming that we do have, it's mostly like the farming that you see out in like California. Right? You have millionaires owning these farms, and they'll have Mexicans or something working the land. Right? You don't really see a lot of small farmers. Maybe some in the Midwest, maybe in like Iowa and those Midwest states, but for the most part, you just don't really see too many small farmers today. The farmers we do have are millionaires who own thousands of acres of land.
You can't really beat them as a small farmer, as production and costs and things like that. I mean, not quality wise, but
what, like the life as far as being able to sustain yourself? Is that what you mean?
yeah, I mean, like small scale, like small farmer compared to manufactured farmer. Like it's just hard to. A small farmer can't really compete with that kind of productivity, and then they're so productive that their goods are so cheap. So
better have a daytime job besides farming.
definitely.
Yeah, there's still some. I mean, we have like Virginia. If you drive through Virginia, you'll still see a bunch of like small farmers. But even in the early days of America, especially in the South, you started seeing these big farms, these big plantations. Only in certain parts of the country did we even see these small farms emerging. And think about it: if we would have been a nation of small farmers, would we be the powerhouse that we are today? Probably not.
No.
Yeah, I see. Bridget, you're shaking your head too.
No, they wouldn't be. We wouldn't be the country we are today.
But it is an interesting, almost utopian vision of America. Like if you go back to Crevecoeur on page 636, he talks about that. In Europe at this time, most of what's happened today in America had already taken place in Europe in the 1700s. You started seeing these big farm owners, these wealthy farm owners. You didn't really see a lot of small farmers in Europe. So it was hard for people to work their way up the social ladder. In Europe, there wasn't a really good middle class. You had the very rich and the very poor for the most part. Right. America here, there's unlimited potential, as Crevecoeur says. About the middle of the page, on 636, he says, he has arrived on a new continent. A modern society offers itself to his contemplation, different from what he had hitherto seen. It is not composed, as in Europe, of great lords who possess everything and of a herd of people who have nothing. Here are no I'm tongue twisted here. Aristocracy families of a herd of people who have nothing. There are no courts, no kings, no bishops, no ecclesiastical dominion, no invisible power giving to a few a very visible one, no great manufacturers employing thousands, no great refinements of luxury. The rich and the poor are not so far removed from each other as they are in Europe. Some few towns excepted, we are all tillers of the earth, from Nova Scotia to West Florida. We are a people of cultivators scattered over an immense territory, communicating with each other by means of good roads and navigable rivers, united by the silken bands of mild government, all respecting the laws without dreading their power because they are equitable. So there you go, right? At this time period, as he said, the divide between rich and poor wasn't too vast, right? This, if you look at like economic history numbers, right, there wasn't people who were great big millionaires at this time, right? For the most part, this was the time period where that was the closest to being equal, where everybody had almost equal types of wealth. So compare that to today, where you have billionaires and trillionaires, right? And you have, people making under $100,000 a year, right? So think about that divide between the most rich and the most poor. That's what a manufacturing society led to, right? We can argue the merits of that, right? But we just did almost, because we talked about, well, would we be a powerhouse today if we would have been small farmers? Probably not, right? So, but this was our time period of relative, everybody was almost equal because there was a lot of small farms in this time period. So Crevecoeur's letter 2 is a lot about the Enlightenment. This is an Enlightenment document. And I should probably define the Enlightenment for you guys. So we mentioned last week that this was a time period where secular reason started to happen. This is the time period of the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment was almost a rejection. This whole movement was a rejection of religion and basing things on faith and all of this, right? The Enlightenment was a time period in which science was starting to become widely accepted. You had these great philosophers like John Locke emerging in this time period. This is pretty much a period of science and reason. Right? We shouldn't rely on our emotions. Right? Our emotions kind of have gotten us into trouble in the past, especially in America. Right? If you think about witch trials, for instance. So we should be reasonable. This is a time period where you classify things, even classify people, as we'll talk about with Jefferson.
What's the deism that they talked about in the Enlightenment compared to Christianity?
So, deism is this idea that you're not exactly an atheist, right? You do believe that there's a God, that God exists, but you don't necessarily know if it's the Christian God or if it's some other type of divine force. The deists believe that God created the earth, set the earth in motion, and then kind of just took a back seat and just watched it from there.
Doesn't intervene in your daily life.
Right. And both Jefferson and Franklin, as we'll see, were deists. who pretty much believe that. They believe in God, but not necessarily God as we would think of in a Christian sense. So
It's kind of like, like the laws of physics. Like, if you think that's real, I think a deist would say, well, God wrote the laws of physics, and it's set in stone, and like something like that. You think?
yeah, like they often call God like a watchmaker. Right? He made the watch ticks. Right? Like something like the laws of physics. Right? That's part of the watch ticking. So it's an interesting idea. I mean, all these guys still found value in religion, right? Even though they didn't necessarily weren't Calvinists or something like that, they still found a lot of value in religion.
They were all Freemasons too, and in order to be a Freemason, you have to believe in a supreme being. And I know my Freemason friends around here, they don't think you could have like a good moral compass, and you have to, in order to have a good moral compass, you have to believe in a supreme being and not necessarily be, religious, I guess.
That's so funny you mentioned that, because that's what I kind of got when they kept saying about this secret club. I kept thinking of the Masons. You know what I'm saying? Because they're like so secretive. I was like, man, that must have been the start of it.
Yeah, the Junto that he talks about, that Franklin talks about.
That secret club that they had.
I mean, the symbology is everywhere. It's on our currency and on our buildings, and
there's been a lot of interesting speculation over the past couple of years about the Juntos, about new stuff that's coming out. Like apparently Franklin and his buddies would get cadavers on the black market and like experiment on them and stuff just to learn about anatomy and things like that. So there's an article that came out a couple of years ago asking if Ben Franklin was secretly a serial killer, right? But because of this cadaver evidence that started coming out.
I've seen that.
I was in one of them videos that you sent.
Yeah.
What is it?
I said, I think they mentioned that in one of them videos that you sent on Blackboard.
Did they?
Yeah, there were thousands of bones like in his house. But they say it was because he had a roommate that worked on like
that he let
bodies
work
or
in his
whatever.
basement.
Yeah.
It would be funny if he really was, in retrospect.
You never know. He wrote his biography. He made himself out to look, a certain way. So I'm sure he wouldn't have included that in.
He definitely wasn't a smart businessman. I mean, I think he was kind of nice, but for real, I mean, he got his friends gypped him. I mean, they took advantage of him.
I thought that was hilarious with the drunk.
Yeah. Well, let's keep Franklin to the side for a few. Let's get through Crevecoeur first. This Enlightenment period, right? This was a rejection of emotions, time of science, and sometimes the science was so extremely science that it was strange. Like especially when you start seeing stuff like Jefferson talking about black people, talking about their qualities, and he tries to classify them like they're animals and things like this. Right? So we see a lot of the limits of the Enlightenment today. But for the most part, they believed in nurture over nature, right? John Locke had the idea of tabula rasa, right? Meaning that we're blank slates. So at birth, we're blank slates. We're shaped by values. We're shaped by our parents. Right? We're shaped by other people around us. You're not necessarily born bad or good. It's like almost your upbringing that causes you to be the way that you are. if you remember, Bridget, we talked about that a lot with Frankenstein, right? Frankenstein's a novel that's part of this period. So Crevecoeur goes over this on 637, and he compares people to plants. Pretty close to the bottom, he says everything has, let's see, he says, urged by a variety of motives, here they came. Everything is tended to regenerate them. New laws, a new mode of living, a new social system. Here they are become men. In Europe, they were as so many useless plants, wanting vegetative mold and refreshing showers. They withered and were mowed down by want, hunger, and war. Now, by the power of transplantation, like all other plants, they have taken root and flourished. Formerly, they were not numbered in any civil lists of their country, except in those of the poor. Here they rank as citizens. So he's saying here, right? You know, well, here we have fresh earth, right? People can thrive, you know, compared to Europe, where if you're born in poverty, right, you're gonna probably stay in poverty no matter how hard you work. But the most important part of this letter is on the same page at the bottom of 638. He says here, he is an American who, leaving behind him all his ancient prejudices and manners, receives new ones from the new mode of life he has embraced, the new government he obeys, and the new rank he holds. He becomes an American by being received in the broad lap of our great alma mater. Here, individuals of all nations are melded into a new race of men whose labors and posterity will one day cause great changes in the world. Americans are the Western pilgrims who are carrying along with them their great mass of arts, sciences, vigor, and industry, which began long since in the East. They will finish the great circle. The Americans were once scattered all over Europe. Here they are incorporated into one of the finest systems of population which had ever appeared, which will hereafter become distinct by the power of the different climates they inhabit. So this is the idea of the American melting pot, right? The great American melting pot. We're a nation of immigrants. We all came over here. So he's talking here, like, no longer, once these people got to America, it no longer mattered where they came from. Right? So it didn't matter if they immigrated here from England or France or Germany, right, or Norway or wherever, right? Once people come over here, they melt, they leave behind those old values, right? And they melt and they become Americans. Right? So this is this idea that we are a diverse country, right? But at the same time, everybody has to give a little to become an American. Right. So think about that today. This idea is still prominent today. Right? If you talk about like Hispanic people coming here, for instance, right? You know, should a lot of Hispanic people have to give up a lot of their old customs and manners, including their language, right, to acclimate themselves to America? Right. Oftentimes they say, well, you have to learn English. They should have to learn English to become citizens. Right. Well, that's this idea of a melting pot. Right? You have to give a little in order to become an American. It no longer matters if you're Irish or Scottish or Mexican or French or whatever, right? Once you come over here, you're an American. And all those old things no longer matter. What do you guys think of this idea, especially how it still applies today? Do you guys think that people who immigrate here should still kind of give up some of their old manners and customs, or should they be celebrated more? Like, should we celebrate Irishness like St. Patrick's Day, right? Should we celebrate being Scottish, right? Like, what do you guys think of all this?
I don't think there's anything wrong with being proud of who you are. what I kind of really have a problem with in life is trying to, and it goes both ways, it's forcing your belief and your way of life on me. I shouldn't, you understand what I'm saying? It's, let me try to figure out how I'm trying to say it. I think that, just say a Mexican, let's say a Mexican immigrates here. I believe that they should be allowed to speak Spanish. They should be allowed to have their customs and everything like that. But I don't know how to speak Spanish, so maybe learn English too, That's all I'm saying.
Right. I definitely think that they should learn our language. If you're going to live here, we shouldn't change our ways to accommodate them. I mean, you made the choice to come here.
I don't think we should make our kids learn Spanish in school. I think that should be like college, like you can choose to take those classes. But I don't think teaching 12-year-olds to speak Spanish is necessarily right.
They don't teach it in class anyway. My daughter had it for 3 years. She could say hola and maybe count to 4, and that's it. It's online.
Yeah.
They don't have a teacher.
I agree. I think it benefits a Hispanic person more to learn English in America than in America learning Spanish. I would say.
That's what I was trying to say. You said it better than me. Thank you.
Thanks.
I think it's nice that we do set aside on our calendar days for them. I mean, we've got Cinco de Mayo, we've got, like you said, St. Patrick's Day, but at the same time, come 4th of July, I expect them to celebrate it. I mean, we all, we should be joined together, like you said, melted as one.
It's everybody's thing. 4th of July is for sure.
Well, if you're an American and if they're here in America, they need to celebrate ours. Now, as far as like the teaching of the Spanish and everything, I think when you have these communities, like say down, close to the border of Mexico and everything, you kind of have to, those kids kind of have to, I guess, to be bilingual.
That's true.
In that aspect. Where here in West Virginia, you don't, I wouldn't know what anyone was saying to me. They could be cussing me out in Spanish. I would never know.
We definitely got schools that's got, majority Hispanic people, and it's very important to learn English in those places, especially for like education and things like that.
I would like to see a class that teaches our dialect, because I get made fun of for my accent more than anybody I know, and that's foreign people included.
Well,
they hear West Virginia and they automatically assume that you're stupid.
Well, listen,
I get that.
I'm actually on vacation right now. I'm in Florida, and when we checked in a couple of days ago, like all my information is right there on my thing, and the woman asked me if I was from Europe. I'm like, what? No,
Wow.
I've been accused of being from Texas, but not Europe. She's like, no, you got that accent, but I mean, I didn't ask her where she was from. She told me she was from London, but I know being down here, you have got a lot of diversity. And like I heard these two men talking in Dunkin' Donuts last night, like they were in their own language. Like I wouldn't know anything they said, but then when it was time to order, they spoke complete plain English, like probably better than I am. I have slang, but I know, I mean, me and they'll look at you, you do kind of get made fun of. But as far as like their celebration, I think it goes like, if they really want to celebrate their heritage or their, stuff that they celebrate, that can be done personal. You know what I mean? I don't think America should have to change for it. Nobody, very few people celebrate my birthday. Very few people celebrate your all's, I'm sure. It's not that it should be something huge. I think that, but I do think that they should be allowed to, celebrate their own thing. But kind of privately, Small. We shouldn't have to give up
right
a day I don't know, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because then I guess we kind of need to learn, we want them to learn about our customs, but I guess we kind of need to learn about theirs too.
Yeah.
I enjoy learning about other customs, and Tasha can tell you I am unbelievably fascinated by Amish and Mennonite people. I don't know why, but they fascinate me. And
Mennonites can sing. Every single one of them.
really?
Yes, every single one. We went on vacation one year and we were right beside a whole big, huge family of them. And every night they would all sing gospel songs and they were amazing.
Oh.
Them doing that as a family thing.
Hi.
I could see them doing that as an everyday family thing.
Yeah. But I mean, learning about other cultures fascinates me. And what worries me is it's becoming kind of normal in this country to be ashamed to be American. And that I don't want to be ashamed. I don't expect you to be ashamed of where you're from, and I want you to celebrate that. Don't expect me to be ashamed of where I'm from. Same with West Virginia. I'm very proud to be from West Virginia.
You still have to make people realize sometimes that there is a West Virginia.
Yeah. Instead of Western Virginia.
Well, no, the one we kept saying, oh, Virginia. What part of Virginia?
The part that
Yeah, people don't even know we're a state anymore.
Not the western part of Virginia, West Virginia, the state. And then they think you're being smart, like you're not. But it's like they don't know.
Your guys are right to point out even regional differences, like people who live in certain states, right? You kind of, with this melting pot idea, you kind of have to give that up a little bit too, right? Yeah. You're American first and foremost. You're like a West Virginian or a Virginian or a Georgian or whatever. So you're that second, right? So a lot of people have more pride in their states than they do in the country. Right? You saw a lot of that before the Civil War, right? As we'll get to. But this is an interesting. You guys all. This was a great conversation. You guys all seem to mostly agree with the melting pot idea, right? That everybody should give a little. We can celebrate it some, but on a personal, local level. So I'm right there with you. I mean, I think this country is great because we're a melting pot of different people. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're what country you came from originally or what country your ancestors came from. You're an American now. That's all that matters.
Right.
It kind of goes back to what Lisa was talking about, the forcing thing too. When you're forced to do something, you don't want to do it.
Right.
Especially if you're stubborn like me. You're going to put your foot down and you're going to make sure you don't do it. So don't force it on me to learn your language or something like that. And I think that it would be done, people would want to do it more if things wasn't so forced.
Yeah, lots of states have tried to pass laws saying that English is the official language of the state. Like, of course it is, right?
That don't make no sense.
Yeah, do you even have to pass anything? Do you even have to do that?
It's a shame that that's even brought up.
West Virginia tried to do that recently. They tried to make English the official language of the state. Like, no shit, of course it is. Right?
Are they afraid someone's going to come in and claim another language first?
Our wonderful state legislature, right?
Yeah.
Some of the stuff they come up with.
Oh,
you know what though, if you think about it, they might not be able to understand us. But there's even though we are that one state, we are so broken down.
Mm-hmm.
And if any of you all are from Charleston originally or anything like that, but it's like the further north you go, the ruder people get.
Yes.
And me and my daughter went to Pennsylvania one time, and I held the door open for somebody, and I was like, "Oh, they at least say thank you." She's like, "Mom, you're in Pittsburgh. Nobody says thank you. You don't even hold a door for anybody." It's just like you can't get out of that's your comfort zone. but I do believe in showing kindness and everything, but they might want to pass that English thing just to get rid of their slang, right, Lisa?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was just sitting here thinking that I'm from Lincoln County and I'm from Harts Creek, and the accent that I have, I get made fun of in the southern tip of Logan County. But the further north that you get into Lincoln County, like it's a 15-minute drive from Harts Creek to Guyan Valley, and I was made fun of by people from Guyan Valley for the way I talk. I'm like, but I'm speaking English and I know you understand me. So why pick apart? And my daughter does this to me, and I love my child very much. But if she picks on me one more time for saying winder, me and her's gonna fight because that's how I talk and I don't change it.
Yeah, I
How do
don't
you,
think it's so much.
As
I
an
don't think
English,
it's so much as their accent as it is we use words that other people don't.
Yeah.
I'm gonna send you guys a survey, by the way. There's a professor at WU named Kirk Hazen. He studies the West Virginia dialects on the county levels and stuff. He's doing a survey right now about how do you say Appalachian. Right? Do you say it as
Appalachian.
Appalachia.
Yeah. You say Appalachia, right? How do you say it? Everybody around here knows it's Appalachia, right?
Yeah.
So,
That's how you know if someone's from around here or not.
yeah. Yeah, I'll send you guys that survey and you can answer it if you want.
I done clinical rotations at like the Boone Hospital, and I thought they were supposed to be like way more countryer than I was, but I'm from Mingo County, and they all made fun of my accent.
I thought I was going to get in a fist fight at Cass Railroad one time, and this was before I was in church, and my husband begged me to shut up. And because we were ordering food and she made fun of me and I got mad and I said things that I shouldn't have. And he said, will you please shut up? She's going to spit in our food. But don't make fun of me, especially when I'm patronizing your business.
That's how I feel when I go to like Chinese restaurants and the waiters can barely understand you. So they keep asking you like what, like to repeat yourself, and it just aggravates me.
Yeah, even when I go to Mexican and stuff, like sometimes they'll say stuff and you can tell like they're trying to be sweet. So I kind of feel bad that like I can't understand them. But then I think, well, maybe they came here, so like they should know.
Yeah, I've been to national conferences before where I'll do something like read a paper. Pretty much every time I go, I have at least one person who makes some snide joke about the accent and all that stuff. So it is something that we have to put up with.
Even when you don't even think your accent's bad, when like yours don't seem bad to me, but I'm sure when you go up north, people comment on it.
Yeah, it's like with my speech pattern, I use correct grammar and whatnot, but I don't do a lot of things like put R's in words like window, winder. Like
Well, see, I do that, but that's how my mama said it.
Yeah.
And you know,
that's a West Virginia thing. It's what we do. Like
right.
Washington, you call it Washington, right?
Well, my husband made fun of me the other day because I called it a wash rag, and I thought he would die. I'm like, but that's what it is.
Did you actually change it?
I have the slow speech pattern. So.
Can we actually change it if we tried? I mean, how hard would that be?
He said, spell it. I'm like, WARS.
We also have a tendency to draw the ing off of everything.
Yes.
Like how we just cut words short, like did you eat? You can just simple that to Jeet. One word, Jeet.
Fix it.
Have an entire conversation and not a whole actual word.
Like, and up until I got into like high school, people made fun of me because my dad, I'm literally from like the head of the holler. I'm from Marbone. I don't know if any of y'all know where that is, but my dad would always say like, did you eat that or something, like Like you would think something was wrong with him, but that's just how we would say it. And finally, I got in high school, and I was like, "Yeah, I ate cereal for breakfast," and somebody was like, "You ate it," and I had to learn myself to like fix and say ate.
Yep.
It was awful.
Yeah, some people are able to shed the accent completely. They call that code switching. Right? You can
Oh
code
no, my
switch.
husband can do that. He's so professional on the phone, and I can't. I'm me.
My oldest one went to when she went to college, she went to Marshall, and a lot of people made fun of her, and some people would call her the Southern Belle and stuff like that, just to irritate her. So she calls me one day, and she was so embarrassed, and it's so funny and stupid at the same time to tell this story. But the Vienna sausages. How many
Beanie
people call
Weenies.
She called me and she said, "Mom." They're like, "What?" And she's like, "The beanie weenies." She said, "You have lied to me all my life." I said, "No, it's just that's the way we talk."
I mean, you get some of this stuff from your family, and your inflection is from how, I mean, I love my daddy. God knows I love my daddy, but he says poo and school, and it drives me crazy because I've always said pool and school. But now I don't know if anybody else's parents did this, but my daddy told me lies, and like bad lies. Like he told me one time that the holes of donuts are poisonous. That's why they cut them out. So here I was 3 years old in the back seat watching my daddy eat donut holes and hysterical because he was going to die. And he said the same thing about the heels of bread. He said they're poisonous, and that's why they just put them on either end to protect the rest of the bread. And to this day, I can't eat heels of bread.
My grandparents used to tell me that every day at the beach, the lifeguards would turn the waves on. And he would have me run to the window and check every day to see if that lifeguard had turned the waves on yet. They was always on.
Well, guys, let's kind of rope it back in a little bit here since we got a limited time. I don't mind to stay after 8. I mean, if you guys want to, if you guys are still feeling it. But
Probably like, I'm on vacation. We'll
Right.
wrap it up.
Yeah.
But Crevecoeur's letter does a lot of interesting things after this melting pot idea. Like he talks about like what's makes a Pennsylvanian, right? Compared to like what makes a Southerner. Right? He goes in.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, he goes into like a lot of this is the Enlightenment stuff in this letter. Right? He goes over a lot about like how does climate affect the temper of people. Like how does climate affect their manners and customs? He does a lot of interesting stuff like that. Like he talks about slavery in the South. He says that, well, the hot climates cause white people to be lazy pretty much. And right, he says that's part of like why Southern slavery was a thing, right? You see the climate leads to excess. Like he talks about how Southerners will tend to gorge a meal, for instance, rather than eating balanced meal, right? Because of the hot weather and whatnot. I mean, it's hard to argue with a lot of these observations that he's making, like climate, the soil. Like we're just like the soil in many ways. Like part of where we are is part of who we are. He goes into a lot of that here. And that's going to be something we'll segue over to talking about Jefferson, because Jefferson takes that idea to a complete extreme. But yeah, he goes into that. He talks about the ills of slavery here. Right? He goes into that detail about how he saw the slave who was left out to die, right, in South Carolina when he was there. But he's also very critical of mountaineers. If you guys noticed that from this reading. He does not like the idea of a mountaineer, right? Someone who's just living off killing animals and hunting and things like that. And he finds that very barbaric. Right? So compared to being a farmer where you're cultivated and part of the earth. If you're a mountaineer who's living on hunting at the time, right? These frontiersmen, right? The end of this letter ends kind of dramatically, right? Because he's like, God help us if we become this, right? He talks about how you live life like this, you become worse for it. So yeah, if we think of ourselves as mountaineers, right? He didn't like that, right? He wanted like farming, and farming breeds manners and good customs and things like that. What do you guys think before we move on from Crevecoeur? Any thoughts on this stuff about how like where you live like shape like who we are, things like that, especially his comments on the South? I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say about that.
No, I agree. I think that's a good point, that where we live shapes us into who we are, and their personality, their work ethic, and how, how we per se judge other people and the way they live.
Definitely does. I mean, if I was born in New York City or something, I would definitely not be the same person I am today. That's for sure.
I've always said, and this is just my personal thing, that like where I was raised is not how I was raised, because I'm from Harts Creek and we have a very, just to be honest with you, a racist reputation. And I wasn't raised that way. And because sometimes you've got to be smart enough to rise above how you were raised in past generations to teach your children different.
I think even down to compassion, the way we're raised, I mean, it has, you go somewhere else, there's not as much compassion as what we have for each other.
We live life in the slow lane. I guess you would say we can appreciate the small things, I guess.
I think as far removed as we are from what you would call an urban area, it kind of keeps us more human, I guess is what you could say. Like if something were to happen in my family, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt my church would have food here within an hour, and a preacher would be here, and my mom and dad would be knocking down my door. I mean, it's just, and my neighbors around me, they would be here asking, if everything was okay and if there's anything to do, they could do for me and stuff. And to me, that's what makes West Virginia so wonderful, especially the southern part of it, is we still have our humanness.
Well, even when it comes to stuff like food that you eat, right? Like let's say you grow up in California, right? It's a lot easier to be healthy if you live there. Right? They have all this organic fruit that you can buy next to the side of the road, right? Here we're relying on almost imports of food because we don't make our own food. So, I mean, even when it comes to that kind of stuff, it affects who we are, right?
Well, me and Lisa both work in after school programs, and I've heard Lisa say this many a time to people that started out 10 years ago training us out of Kanawha County. They would always brag, how well that we do the after school and we do it on such a short, low income budget, supply budget that we have. And Lisa's even told them, like, we come from a place where if we don't have it, we engineer it. We find how to accomplish that goal. We don't always have what we need. So I think in that aspect, it makes us more resilient.
Well, let's segue over to Jefferson. Go to page 711. It's easy to remember, right? 711.
Slurpee.
Now, with Jefferson, I wanted to bring your attention to this first passage about the natural bridge. The natural bridge is only about 2 hours from here, if you're ever curious. Yeah,
Because I've been there.
You've been there, right? So now you got to read Jefferson's famous account of it here, right? So they always put this in the anthology just because it's a nice like depiction of American nature, like it's being sublime and very beautiful. Yeah, but it's only about 2 hours. It's pretty close to Roanoke. So if you guys are ever want to take a day trip, that's a good place to go. Right? Jefferson actually owned that land back then. And so I think his initials are even inscribed in it. But the part of this document, Notes on the State of Virginia, this was Jefferson's Enlightenment project, right? So he does a lot of stuff in here. Right? He talks about religion. He talks about the natural bridge. He talks about Indians. They don't put it in their anthology, but Jefferson actually gives the Chief Logan story in the Notes in the State of Virginia and his chapter about Indians. Right? He talks about how I told you guys last week with slavery, like a lot of the justifications, like why couldn't Indians be good slaves? Jefferson goes into that here, right? He talks about like how Chief Logan was so stoic and resilient and things like that. So if you ever want to read the Chief Logan story, just look it up from Jefferson, Notes in the State of Virginia. But they always put the part about Africans in this. This is key to understanding like why were Black people especially enslaved. A lot of the stuff that Jefferson puts in here is part of that, as part of why they were, attitudes about them. So like we just talked about with like the South, where Crevecoeur said Southerners are lazy, right, because of the hot climates. Jefferson does a similar project. Look on 712. You know, he says a lot of like really uncomfortable stuff by today's standards. On the bottom of it, he's describing Africans. He says, add to these flowing hair, a more elegant symmetry of form, their own judgment in favor of the whites, declared by their preference of them, as uniformly as in the preference of the orangutan for the Black women over those of his own species. The circumstance of superior beauty is thought worthy attention to the propagation of our horses, dogs, and other domestic animals. Why not in that of man? Besides those of color, figure, and hair, there are other physical distinctions proving a difference of race. They have less hair on the face and body. They secrete less by the kidneys and more by the glands of the skin, which gives them a very strong and disagreeable odor. This greater degree of transpiration renders them more tolerant of heat and less so of cold than the whites. Perhaps, too, a difference of structure in the pulmonary apparatus, which a late ingenious experimentalist has discovered to be the principal regulator of animal heat, may have disabled them from extricating in the act of inspiration so much of that fluid from the outer air, or obliged them in expiration to part with more of it. They seem to require less sleep. A Black, after hard labor through the day, will be reduced by the slightest amusements to sit up till midnight or later, though knowing he must be out with the first dawn of the morning. They are at least as brave and more adventuresome, but this may perhaps proceed from a want of forethought which prevents their seeing a danger till it be present. And present, they do not go through it with more coolness or steadiness than the whites. They are more ardent after their female, but love seems to be with them more an eager desire than a tender, delicate mixture of sentiment and sensation. Their griefs are transient. Their numberless afflictions, which render it doubtful whether heaven has given life to us in mercy or in wrath, are less felt and sooner forgotten with them. In general, their existence appears to participate more of sensation than reflections. And if you go close to the bottom of the page, he says, the Indians, with no advantages of this kind, will often carve figures in their pipes, not destitute of design and merit. They will crayon out an animal, a plant, or a country, so as to prove the existence of a germ in their minds which only wants cultivation. They astonish you with strokes of the most sublime oratory, such as prove their reason and sentiment strong, their imagination glowing and elevated. But never yet could I find that a black had uttered a thought above the level of plain narration, never see even an elementary shade of painting or sculpture. In music, they are more generally gifted than the whites, with accurate ears for tune and time, and they have been found capable of imagining a small catch. Whether they will be equal to the composition of a more extensive run of melody or of complicated harmony is yet to be proved. Misery is often the parent of the most affecting touches in poetry. Among the blacks is misery enough, God knows, but no poetry. Love is to the peculiar cestrum of the poet. Their love is ardent, but it kindles the senses only, not the imagination. Religion induced, indeed, has produced a Phyllis Wheatley, but it could not produce a poet. So I just read you guys a bunch of excerpts. You're actually going to read Phyllis Wheatley for Friday, so you can ask yourself if Jefferson's right about is Phyllis Wheatley a good poet or not. Right, but you guys see what he's doing here. I mean, he's making all these scientific observations, and he's using it to almost justify like why they're supposedly inferior. Right? Why do they make good slaves compared to the Indians even? He talks about like why here Indians don't make good slaves, but why Africans do. This is an Enlightenment project, right? He's making all these assumptions based off of data he's collected, evidence he's collected, and observations he's made. He talks about, he even on the next page talks about Roman slavery, right? He talks about, well, Roman slaves were able to produce art and literature and whatnot. But he says that's because they were white. Right? That's what he says. Right? So this document doesn't make Jefferson seem great in a modern light. Right? So what did you guys make of reading this compared to like the Jefferson you might know from high school, right? What did you guys make of this? Were you shocked to read this?
I wasn't that shocked considering
I
at the
actually
time.
wasn't.
Go ahead. Was it you, Bridget, who just said something? Somebody said something besides Danny?
Oh, I said that I wasn't surprised. I actually got a little bit of this in my English 101 back in high school. So
Did you?
Mhm.
Yeah, he's
Not in this depth, but we touched on it.
right.
I think being a little bit older, and because I graduated 25 years ago, history was a little more glossed over in those days. And the history that I got was kind of a pie in the sky, bird singing version of it. And we weren't exposed to this level of, I guess, what you would just call flat out racism, because it was history. When I went to school, it was all about politics. And that's like West Virginia history. I mean, we went over the mine wars, the Civil War, and that's about it.
And it's all about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was saying it was just all about portraying, America in a positive, as
Right.
positive light as possible. No, they cut the negative, cut the bad things out of it, it seemed.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I can never really remember hearing anything about Jefferson was just like a founding father.
Right.
Like those kind of things. Like I'm kind of like Danny. I wasn't shocked as considered the time that it was in, but I'm like Lisa on the side of that. It really is, and kind of it's racism.
And you hate to look at an American hero as a hardcore racist like that, because he was an American and hero to most of the founding father. It's you don't want to look at him in a negative light, but I mean, we're all human, and remember he did a lot of good, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Did he
Jefferson.
al-
Go ahead.
I mean, he had slaves,
Mhm.
but did he not also have a kid
Yeah.
with the slave?
So this is an interesting thing in itself. Like he had a slave mistress named Sally Hemings,
Right.
right? And he had bukus of kids with her. And like back then, like if a slave owner had a kid with a slave, the kid would be a slave, right? That was just a way of producing more slaves, like having children with your own slaves, right? So, there's evidence to suggest that he actually loved her, but even like in his death, he didn't even free her in his will on his death. He was kind of a big ass, right, for that. There's actually a Family Guy skit that shows like a group photo of Monticello of Jefferson. It's like Jefferson and like 20 black kids. It's pretty funny.
You know, that happened a lot because I have an ancestor. I think it was my 5 greats grandpa. He had at least one child with a slave, and half the family accepted him and half of the family didn't. And I could take you to where he's buried in Farrellsburg, and he's buried half in the family plot and half out.
Yeah, we'll talk more about slavery in a couple of weeks. Like at this time period, like in the Constitution, the slave trade was banned. Right, so you couldn't no longer import slaves from Africa. So like at this time period, you had to like make them reproduce to continue the slave line. Right? That was one way that they did it. And that's why they came up with all these rules. Like if you're 1/16 black, you can still be classified as a slave, right? So they made all these rules about race.
Would they ever even admit that, like Jefferson ever admit all this during his time alive, or or did they all try to keep this kind of hidden, or was it kind of known?
It came out like that. Alexander Hamilton actually used it as a weapon against Jefferson in politics, talking about how he had children with the slaves and stuff like that. So yeah, it came out for him.
Mm-hmm.
Now the Jefferson Foundation, only in the past couple of years have they actually acknowledged that he had children with Sally Hemings. Like I used to just go. I've been to Monticello a bunch of times. I would always go in and like ask them questions, like, "Where was Sally at here?" Right? Like they never wanted to answer it, right? Because they were forbidden to, right? So, but actually, over the past couple of years, they've actually been better about that. If you go visit, like they talk about her. They act like she exists now, right? And they're better about it now than they used to be. They actually acknowledge it. They actually like all the descendants actually like went on Oprah a couple of years ago, right? And they all like met Jefferson's white descendants and his black descendants.
That's interesting for sure.
But I wanted to go over this document just to show you, like this is how slaves became slaves. This is how attitudes about them came about. A lot of these like Enlightenment reasons, right? Well, they sweat less, right? So they can work harder, right? It's almost like he actually talks about like their penis size and stuff like that here, right? He does a lot of that stuff, right? They're more athletic than we are, right? He goes over all that stuff in this. And he talks about this is why they're less than us, right? And he uses it as justification for that. Right? So same judgments a lot of people make today, right? They were making then. So now let's talk about Franklin in the last half hour we got. Right? Franklin's text is fundamental. It's a fundamental text. You can't teach this class without teaching Ben Franklin's autobiography. I mean, you just can't. But this is important in many ways. This is an autobiography, so this is one of the first examples of that, either in Europe or America. So this was innovating a new genre. It's almost like one of the first self-help books in a way, right? Because he goes over like all these morals about how we can live successful lives and all of this stuff. So it's one of the first like American dream stories. Here's a person who went from rags to riches. Right? It does that. It's very witty, right? He talks about like different attitudes we can have to be successful with different people, like modesty, for instance. Right? He goes over these rules about if you follow these values, you can be successful. It's the thing with Franklin. What I want to go with Franklin is he's a very cheeky guy. Like he says this stuff tongue in cheek. He doesn't necessarily mean a lot of it. That's something you guys should probably know about him. Franklin was as close to a rock star as a god in the 18th century. Like we owe our winning the Revolution War to Ben Franklin in many ways. Like he went to France as an ambassador, and like he would sleep around with like all like men would like throw their wives at him, like he would do all that type of stuff in the name of diplomacy, right? He was a rock star. He would wear like oftentimes they wanted him to wear a coonskin hat, right? So they could make fun of like the backwoods American. He would play along, right? I mean, he was brilliant. He was a scientist, right? As you guys know, he helped invent electricity. But
didn't he try to create his own alphabet?
I don't know about that. I wouldn't be surprised.
It was in one of them videos that you had posted. I watched most of them.
I seen that. Like he wanted to do away with like the letter C because it found it like redundant, and also in there he said he about killed himself because he wanted to cook a turkey with electricity, and I'm about killed himself.
Yeah, he was a rock star, right, for this time period. So a lot of this stuff is very tongue in cheek and witty. He's almost saying a lot of this stuff with a wink, wink, wink. Right. But what do you guys think of this? We can go a lot of places. You can talk about his values that he talks about. We can talk about his intellectual club. We can talk about his views on religion. Right? But what'd you guys make of this autobiography?
I feel like he's done more in 17 years than I have in my whole life. Like, he was definitely very productive. Very driven.
I felt like I was reading forever, and like for some reason I was thinking like he was just getting older, and then it skips back in one part and it said that he was 17. I was like, what?
So how old was he when his parents died?
Well, when he left his parents, he was about 10 or 11. I think they died later.
Okay, because I know it says at 10-year-old, I was taken from my home to assist my father in his business. I just wonder because he was the last one, right? He was the last child, and they died like 89 and 85. But I was astounded that his dad had 17 children.
Yeah, it never said what happened to the first wife, did it?
No, because I was thinking, where did the 3 more come in at? But it just said he carried his wife with 3 children into England, and really there was nothing else said, That's a lot of kids, though.
And his second wife, they lived to be an old age, and they loved each other.
Yeah.
They worked. They didn't have a whole lot. It looked like you said, it was rags to riches.
Right. I know it says she was 85 and he was 89. So I was just wondering, like, how old was he when they passed away? Like, they had to have had him really late in life. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly, but he wasn't too old, I know, when they passed. Yeah, he actually went back to Boston to go to their funeral and stuff. Yeah, we get here that he pretty much was a slave for his brother. Right? He was an indentured servant to his brother. So that's how he actually learned the printing trade. That's how he became big, right? The printing trade. Owning a printing shop. What'd you guys think of his personality here, his cheekiness and all that? Anything that he said that especially stick out to you?
Just what I was saying. I think his vegetable diet and his theory on life that if you don't eat the meat, that you're going to be a lot healthier. He seemed to be like he was a healthier guy. He cared, not eating. I guess, you know what I was saying, like the meat, like a vegetarian possibly. I don't know.
Yeah, like they said that, but then like you look at all these old pictures supposedly of Ben Franklin, and he's not a thin dude. Like
I've never seen a thin picture of him.
It's like he talked about that vegetable diet so much in here.
He tried to get one of his buddies to do it. He couldn't do it. He ate like the whole plate of meat.
Pig roast or something other. He ate it all, didn't he?
Yeah.
Maybe it was just a theory that he had and he didn't want to do it in case it was crappy and he was trying to get other people to
try it out first, see if it worked for them.
Right. If it works for you, maybe I'll try it.
He did say he had like increased, I think, energy or something. He said it did benefit him in some way. And it could have been placebo. But
I think in like certain parts, it showed like his humor too. I can't remember where it was at, but I remember one part, it was like he was joking about something, I think.
And he did that tongue-in-cheek thing with religion quite a bit. I seen. He said, like, let me see, talking about his father's little library consisted of chiefly books talking in polemic divinity, most of which I read and since often regretted. That at a time for such a thirst for knowledge, more proper books had not fallen in my way. So, like, since he wasn't going to be a clergy, he felt like he just really wasted his time for like reading these books.
Well, and he knew he wasn't good at arithmetic, and he talked about that often too. Like he kind of joked about it.
Feel him there.
And that was a young age, and so I mean, he really questioned. Yeah, he's really questioning things at a young age. He didn't just like believe just because that was how he was raised or whatever. And
yeah, he talks about alcohol, right? How alcohol can ruin people's like dispositions. And that was an Enlightenment idea, right? He talks about how his friend like ripped him off, how he was a drunk.
he knocked him over over the boat
Right.
into the water.
Yeah, page 523 is where it comes up with these values. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say about this. His values for living a successful life. The previous page is when he talks about religion, by the way, when he talks about how even though he's a deist, he still finds value in going to church and stuff.
Keeping the Sabbath.
What page was that?
What is it?
What page was that?
523.
Thanks.
This is the formula for a successful life. So let's see what you guys think. So in order of importance: temperance, eat not to dullness, drink not to elevation. Silence, speak not but what may benefit others or yourself. Avoid trifling conversation. Order, let all your things have their places. Let each part of your business have its time. Resolution, resolve to perform what you ought. Perform without fail what you resolve. Frugality, make no expense but to do good to others or yourself. Waste nothing. Industry, lose no time. Be always employed in something useful. Cut off all unnecessary actions. Sincerity, use no hurtful deceit. Think innocently and justly, and if you speak, speak accordingly. Justice, wrong none by doing injuries or omitting the benefits that are your duty. Moderation, avoid extremes. Forbear resenting injuries so much as you think they deserve. Cleanliness, tolerate no uncleanliness in body, clothes, or habitation. Tranquility, be not disturbed at trifles or accidents common or unavoidable. Chastity, rarely use venery but for health or offspring, never to dullness, weakness, or the injury of your own or another's peace or reputation. He's very tongue-in-cheek about that one, by the way. Humility, imitate Jesus and Socrates. Right? So that's his order of importance. This is how you lead a successful life, right? Like I
Leaves
said,
no room for mistake.
No, I think them are tougher than the 10 Commandments.
Yeah, they're not bad values and goals. But
I agree.
I think I would struggle with these more than the Ten
Probably hard
Commandments,
to follow.
especially where he talks about the trifling conversation, because I'm a talker.
be not a gossiper though.
I think I struggle with cleanliness.
I don't know about the gossiping and stuff, because if you've got a good story, I want to hear it.
Yeah, he wouldn't want to walk into my house. Tolerate no uncleanliness in the body. I wore a shirt the other day and didn't realize that I had a stain on it. I thought, oh my gosh. Well.
I mean, I can't argue with any of these. I mean, really.
I love how humility is the last one on the list. That's my favorite part.
Yeah.
He actually talks earlier in the book. He's like, don't be humble most of the time, right? Yeah. Being a little full of yourself's fun, right? People love it.
Couldn't he have just done away with the first 12 and just put imitate Jesus and Socrates?
Yeah, he contradicts himself, right? He talks about how humility is not that big of a deal, and he puts them on his list last. Right? He does it. That's his tongue in cheekness that he does. Where in that document, where did he talk about modesty? 478. It's where he talks about modesty.
I think something could be said about a little bit of a return to some modesty.
Right. How so?
Well,
Need more modesty.
I think that some manners of dress are a little inappropriate, especially when it's a younger age and they are dressing their bodies in a way that they should not. And I mean, I know that men have to be responsible for themselves and stuff too, but I would not allow my child to leave my house wearing a belly shirt and booty shorts, because I know that there are not nice people out there. And I think a little bit of modesty can go a long way.
I agree. I mean, men need to show restraint, but at the same time, they get kind of tempted at the same time, you know.
There's a lot of evil in this world.
No, for sure.
And you got to protect your kids, and if putting on a normal t-shirt is going to protect your kid, put on a normal t-shirt.
At 477 and 78 when he talks about it, he quotes Alexander Pope. He says, men should be taught as if you taught them not, and things unknown proposed as things forgot. So, for want of modesty is want of sense. He pretty much says, don't talk about politics here. Right? That's pretty much what he says.
Pretty good rule.
Isn't there one in here where he makes a move on his friend's girl and then he loses his friend?
He does.
Like, I don't know what he did, if he just made a pass at her or if he tried to touch her or what, but it's like, then he lost his friend. Like, once that happened, she told him. I can't find it though, but
I think that he makes it seem cleaner than it was. I think they actually did have a fling or something like that.
oh, they did? Okay, because it's like he lost one of his good buddies. And he never spoke to him again, is what it said. But I don't know where in here it said it. But like you know, we don't know. She might have been flirting back and things led, you know. Maybe that's where the modesty.
He talks about how he sleeps around a lot at one point in the document, like 513 is where he talks about that.
Do you think that could also mean like avoid extremes, like basically too much of anything is a bad thing? Like even too much water and drinking an extreme amount of water will kill you. You know, too much of anything, you get obsessive over it and takes away from other things, important things. And
yeah, that's moderation's number 9 on his list.
oh, I'm on the wrong number.
Yeah, number 9. Chastity's second to last, of course. 513 is where he talks about his womanizing. He says, this affair, having turned my thoughts to marriage, I looked around me and made overtures of acquaintance in other places, but soon found that the business of a printer being generally thought a poor one, I was not to expect money with a wife unless with such a one as I should not otherwise think agreeable. In the meantime, that hard to be governed passion of youth had hurried me frequently into intrigues with low women that fell in my way, which were attended with some expense and great inconvenience, besides a continual risk to my health by a distemper, which of all things I dreaded, though by great good luck I escaped it.
Oh, no.
I remember reading that.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's talking about how he's thankful he avoided getting syphilis. Right?
Mhm.
Because back then, if you got syphilis back then, it was a lot more deadly. Right? Because they didn't know how to combat it. It would eventually drive you crazy. It would eventually rot your mind, literally.
Wow.
Right? So, yeah, well, you guys ever want to look into some gross stuff? Look at syphilis untreated over like 20 years. It's bad. So thankfully, Ben didn't get some STDs. Right? He talks about
That we know of.
that we know of.
I don't know. These might have been the rantings of a madman. We don't know.
Yeah, he
I
definitely.
mean, if he did have it, it's not like he would have wrote it. So.
Yeah. This might be the 18th century's version of Medea.
Yeah, he probably got a few when he was in France, if I had to guess. As much as he was womanizing in the court of King Louis. Right? John Adams actually went over there with him. John Adams was this like Puritan, almost very Puritan, strict morals, kind of English Massachusetts guy, right? From like John Adams completely flopped. They had to send him back home because he was pissing off the French too much because he was too moral, right? Compared to Ben. Ben knew how to play them. Right? John Adams was a better ambassador to England, right? Because he was much more in tune with their manners than the French. Yeah.
So was
Or go ahead, Danny.
was Adams not like a big fan of the secular, secular movement, or?
No, he was all about like freedom of religion and stuff. But at the same time, he was a lot more of a devout Christian than Franklin or Jefferson or any of those guys. He actually believed in Christianity and like a lot of the others.
Okay.
Don't not commit adultery.
Hmm.
When he was going by the commandments.
He seems plagiarized.
Yeah, I love the order of his list, right? Just because of knowing what we know about him, the order of his list is kind of funny. Like chastity being second to last. He said lots of stuff though. Like he talks about, you guys know that saying he made, early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. He slept till noon most days. Right? Yeah. Especially when he was in France. Right? He lived life like I do.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
It's great minds think alike, I guess.
But he published like a lot of these like self-help books, right, that gave advice like that, even if he didn't necessarily do it himself.
Follow him.
Page 527 is where he outlines like what a typical day would be for a person following his values. He says you should start out the day, the morning question, what good shall I do this day? Well, first you should rise, wash, and address powerful goodness, contrive the day's business, and take the resolution of the day, prosecute the present study and breakfast. So that's from 5 to 8 a.m., 8 to 11, work, 12 to 1, read or dine, 2 to 5, work, 6 to 9, put things in their places, do your chores. Then from 9 to 10, ask yourself, what good have I done today? 10 to 4, sleep. Right. That's a good day.
That's a good day. It's so ironic that he didn't follow it.
And that shocks me too, considering
His journal is like my journal. You write down, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be motivated to get up and go to the gym at 5 a.m. I'm going to be, but then I just sleep in, But, you have the want to. You got to somehow write it down and hopefully one day you get motivated to do it.
It's hard to argue for productivity in this. Like if I followed the schedule, I would do a lot better myself.
Me too.
I was gonna think he was so like productive, like doing all this stuff. Like how did it, you figured he'd been one of those people that got all of it done by the time you woke up, but no, it's he's such a hard worker. That shocks me.
And
I mean, not that you can't be.
Yeah, he found ways to get stuff done. Right? He didn't do this. He didn't necessarily do this. He found ways.
Yeah.
Maybe that was farmers' day. Get up with the chickens.
It's hard to argue that being a morning person doesn't make people more productive. I think it does.
Yeah.
I say that
makes me feel better.
I say that as a not morning person.
Yeah. Me too.
Right. I used to be on a routine when I worked, and now I'm not. So this past year, I've I used to be that routine person, up at 4:45, out the door to the gym, come back home, and get the kids up ready for school at 6 a.m. to 6:30. We're back out the door by 7:45. I go to work. I work till 5 or 6. Then I'm gone, dinner, ball games, and I'm back in bed by 9 o'clock. But
When you sleep so good, days like that too.
Mm.
You go right to sleep.
as soon as your head hit the pillow, now I find
Yeah.
myself laying there scrolling my phone up till 12, 1, sometimes later until 10 most days now.
I always joke and say I became a college professor just because I didn't want to work at 8 a.m. my whole life. So.
I have insomnia, so when she was getting up, I'm going to bed, and then my husband leaves for work at 4, and I get up and get him out to work, and then I would lay down and get my daughter up at 5:30, and then I'd lay back down for another hour or two, and then I'd get up and start my day. So I've been floating on about 4.5 hours of sleep for 15 years.
But that is the ideal picture of a day right there.
If you can actually live it, great. I don't have that kind of discipline.
I always snap out of it. When I do, it just seems to rotate back around somehow.
It's like it's a New Year's resolution. You start it, but it never makes it.
I would have probably finished my doctorate degree 2 years sooner if I would have done this. Well, guys, it is time to call it a night. So I felt like we covered everything pretty well today. I felt good about it. So yeah, this is a really important time in American literature. This time is when we were becoming a nation. So this stuff is foundational. It's not necessarily prose fiction. We'll get to that type of thing later in the class, but very important stuff here. We got a lot today. Attitudes about slaves and Indians and being farmer versus manufacturing. We covered a lot of stuff today. So remember, for Friday, you're reading two Revolutionary poets, Phillis Wheatley, who Jefferson talks about to one of them. As well, that actually probably will be a question I'll give you. What do you actually think Wheatley's a good poet, unlike what Jefferson thought? And Philip Freneau is our other one. He was a Native American poet, so you'll get that perspective a little bit for Friday too. And then next week, Emerson. Next Tuesday, Self-Reliance, Nature, and Walden, and Henry David Thoreau's first chapter of Walden. Okay, so give yourself time with those. It's not as long, but they're kind of dense. Emerson especially is kind of dense. He's a good read, but he's not necessarily an enjoyable one. You'll get a lot out of it, but it's not as fun as something like Franklin's. So give yourself time for that one, especially. Okay. So we'll see you guys next Tuesday then.
Right.
Have a good
Good
week.
night.
Ah.
Hey, everybody.